Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to Ionian Gaming, and this is going to be episode 5 of the story of my life. And I don't have a really clear picture of where I'm going to go with today's story because I haven't done one of these in quite a while, and I don't know where I should pick up. The last video I did was about 6 months ago, and I was dealing with dating history and leading up to the point where I started dating my son's mom. I'm not quite ready to do that video yet to tell the story of uh, my son's mom's and I relationship and tell the story of what went wrong and tell the story of everything that's been the shit show of my life since that moment. So, we're going to just kind of shoot the shit here, and I'm just going to talk about random things that, you may or may not know that your dad used to do. Several things like right now, you know me as the automotive technician gamer guy who played video games, and a lot of my video game or my streaming channel is dedicated to me beating games that I beat growing up. Just so that you always have a record of me and the fact that your dad actually was good at gaming. He really was. There's so many things I'd like to tell you. I need to teach you before I'm gone and before you grow up, and it's one of these things that I just need to tell you stories. I need to tell you the story about the time your Aunt Shannon got chased by a goose. I need to tell you the story of how I ended up with like 6 million fiberglass splinters in my arm. I need to tell you the story of your great grandfather and how much of a role model he was in my life and how much I loved him. Tell stories of your granddad too, your grandma. In fact, you know what? I'm probably going to tell that story now. Um, the story of grandma and grandpa and how they ended up getting together. So I'm pretty sure I haven't covered this content. So I'm going to do a quick clicky clicky over to YouTube and verify that I haven't done this because that would be embarrassing if I have. See view full playlist. Let's see here. Episode 1, I know, was pretty straightforward. My nephew, your cousin George. Episode 3, which would have been. What was 3? Exes. Okay, so 4 was all about my ex Amy. So, yeah, I never did tell you the story of Grandma and Grandpa and how they ended up together. So, your grandmother, now I know the grandma you know, looks ancient, but my mother used to be, if you see her high school photos, you would say, holy crap, grandma was a hottie. That's not an edible complex. That's me just being factual. She was a very attractive young lady. She married young and had 5 kids. And when she got married, she married a police officer. And in the 70s, in the 60s, let's just say we have come a long way when it comes to violence against women. Okay. Um, my mother's first husband, Jerry, was an abusive alcoholic asshole. And they had 5 kids together. My brother Jerry was the first, and then your Aunt Kathy, and then your brother Doug, or my brother Doug. So it was Jerry, Kathy, Doug, Jody, Chris, me, Shannon. So, long story short, they were married for about 18 years, 19 years, maybe 20 years. Okay, let's just say 20 years. All right, for the story's sake, because Jerry, I actually don't know. Okay, I couldn't tell you. I don't know. As I said, I'm trying to keep this video series honest, and I don't fucking know. So, anyhow, after a very abusive marriage and 5 kids, your grandmother finally filed for divorce. Okay, And Jerry was an abusive, controlling dickhead asshole who would stalk my mother, cause trouble for my mother, just just to make sure that she knew that he was still around. And in fact, my mom probably will never admit this, but she lived in fear of that man until the day he died. And he died in the early 2000s. So for she's been free of his curse for 20 some years. But even growing up, like I was in my 20s in the 2000s, she lived with him constantly on her mind. And that's a terrible way to live. Anyway, after the divorce, now it's the other thing too important to say too is I'm not sure if I've covered this, but my mom's side of the family is extremely Catholic, and my dad's side not so much, very Protestant. So, anyway, back in the 70s, a woman who got divorced in the Catholic Church, didn't matter the reason, she was excommunicated from the Catholic Church. I say that because I have a lot of problems with religion, and I have no problem discussing my problems with religion. However, I am also a born again Christian, and I have accepted Jesus as my Savior. So I am constantly at war with the corruption of man's take on the word of the divine, if that makes sense. The dogma of the situation, if you will. But anyway, she was excommunicated by the church, and that's just something she can't take. She can't take Catholic. She can't take communion with the Catholic Church, which is a big deal. I don't even think she's eligible for last rites. If, but anyway, um, your grandmother worked in a meat packing plant called Montfort's, and it eventually became ConAgra. And when we went to Colorado 2 years ago, you got to drive past some of the feedlots where there was just miles upon miles of cows and tens of miles of stink that go with it. Anyway, your grandmother worked in a meat processing plant there. Your grandfather also worked there, but he worked for the United States Department of Agriculture. His job was to make sure that everything was up to standard. Everything like there was no safety violations, no food sanitary issues, anything like that. And my mom and my dad started working together. Um, my dad graded meat. So if you ever see USDA inspected or approved meat, that's because my dad was a USDA inspector. He doesn't do it now. None of the stamps are his, but you get the idea. Anyway, because he worked in close proximity with my mom, the flirting started, and long story short, they started dating. And some fun stories that I used to hear is my dad, much like me, is kind of arrogant and cocky. Now, my dad has I've never really looked at as a ladies' man, and the thought process terrifies me as much as it should terrify you thinking about your dad that way. However, your dad has dated a lot, and you know this. So, anyhow, my dad was kind of arrogant too, and I know that's a shocker for anyone who's met me. Arrogant, it runs in the family. It really does. But my dad was so confident that he had my mom wrapped around her finger that he made a bet with one of his coworkers that if he goes up to her and he tells her to jump, she'll jump. So my dad did. He goes over to her and he looks at her and he's like, "Pat, jump." And my mom did. My mom thought something dangerous was about to happen. That's why she jumped. Long story short, that was a big joke there. Other things that I learned about the meatpacking plant with my parents too, their early years of dating and so forth, was that my mom would cut the fingertip off of her plastic glove and shove like some ground beef down there and then walk around like, oh no, oh no. Sick humor, but it's kind of funny. I get it. I really do get the humor in it. So anyway, they got married in 75, and then in 76, I came along. And my dad was a farmer out there too. And he bought what is now known as the farm, sight unseen. My grandparents, your great grandparents, on the young side of the family, found this house. And my grandmother swears at the end of the road, your great grandmother swore, at the end of the road, she saw a wolf there. And that was the omen that they needed to buy the house. My uncle, your great uncle Bob, who we are very fortunate to have in our lives on many for many different reasons. I should tell the story about Uncle Bob the badass too, which I'll probably split into that in here a little bit. Uncle Bob the badass. But Uncle Bob told my dad that if he didn't buy this farm, he was going to. If Grandpa didn't buy the farm, Great Uncle Bob was going to buy the farm, and it was a very solid investment by our family. It really was. We lived in the house across the road from where Grandma and Grandpa currently live. And whenever my parents moved out here, I was only like a month and a half old. And Kathy and Doug were old enough to stay in Colorado. Kathy, I think, was her senior year. Jody, Doug, Chris, and myself all moved out to PA. And then after that, I think Doug was in his junior, senior year. And I remember Chris being in school. Okay. Like, that's the only one I really remember being in school was Chris. I remember going to her high school graduation. I don't remember anyone else's. About a year and a month after I was born, in the blizzard of 79, your Aunt Shannon was born. And I'm not going to lie, all right? I'm not really going to lie at all with this. I cannot stress. I don't know how the fuck I'm alive. Because, Liam, when you were born, I was convinced I was never going to be able to keep a child alive. I was convinced of it. And I was scared to death. And we have like, we live in town. You know this. We live in town. My parents lived down on a farm in the middle of bumfuck Egypt. All right? In a blizzard, I'm an infant. I'm 1 year old. They left me with your Aunt Chris and your Aunt Jody and your Uncle Doug. And if you know the three of them the way I know them, that is the most terrifying thing I could say. Especially with Uncle Doug. And what I found out about Aunt Chris and Aunt Jody later. But still, it's probably the most terrifying thing I can think of. So I have no idea how I lived because it was 36 years before you were born. We didn't have the technology we had when you were born. So I don't know how the fuck I'm still alive based on that scenario. Anyhow, throughout the years, your great grandma and grandpa Young helped out a lot on the farm. My dad was a farmer. Times were tight at times on the family farm. We were never really okay. So, like, let me rephrase this. It wasn't about being rich or poor. We were fucking poor at times. There were times I remember very young that my family was on food stamps, um, and that's almost hilarious to think of now. Almost, but going forward in the future, your dad and your aunt Shannon also at one point were on them as well. There's no shame getting government assistance, but it's not a lifestyle. And I'm not going to hem haw around about it. It's there to help people who need it until they don't need it anymore. And that's all I'm going to say about that matter right now. It got to the point where we were so poor, my dad looked at my mom and said, one of us is going to need to get a job or we're going to lose the farm. This information I found out last year. I had no idea that we were in jeopardy of losing our home growing up. I knew things were tight for food and stuff, or not food, but for money. I never had the brand name clothes growing up. I never had the best stuff, but you couldn't have told me that we were poor. My parents somehow always made it work. I never wanted for anything. When I went into band, I used my sister Chris's hand me down trumpet. When it turned out I had some talent for music, my parents bought me a silver trumpet, which is something I had wanted. It was like as soon as I started playing trumpet, I had learned. I saw people who had the silver trumpets, and I wanted one. I wanted the cool valve glove on it. I wanted the cool extra slide. I wanted the tuning slide. I wanted it all. And in 1990 ish, my parents bought me a silver trumpet. Now, granted, at this point, my mom was working as a nurse, and she did get a job. She got her nursing degree and became an LPN. But you couldn't have told me we were poor. We had a Nintendo. Did we have every video game known to man? No, we did not. But I will tell you things that never did happen there. I never went to bed hungry. Not once. If I went to bed hungry, it was a choice of my own. My mom would make two dishes that I did not like. One was Texas hash, which was basically spicy. Um, it's kind of like my spaghetti or my taco spaghetti, except a lot spicier with elbow macaroni noodles, and I couldn't eat it. It was I have a tolerance for spice. Like I used to be able to eat really hot stuff, but now, and I'm almost 50, I can't handle any kind of spice. In fact, this beer I'm drinking right now will probably kill me tonight. Um, but the other thing she made that I couldn't stand was beef stroganoff. I do not like beef stroganoff. There is no way anyone can make it that makes it taste good to me. I can't do it. So, if I went to bed hungry, the reason behind it was that. Some of the times we would eat, my mom, but we always had like peanut butter and bread in the house. So if I was hungry, I could eat a PB and J sandwich. And I know you eat PB and J's a lot, and that's because your dad's lazy and doesn't like to cook every night. Uh, but there were a lot of times, like during the summer months, it was too hot to cook. We literally our dinners would be popcorn and malts, which were basically ice cream milkshakes. Um, and that was what we would eat for dinner. And you know what? It wasn't like I'm kind of struggling to remember here because I think this was during one of the poor times. So this might have been why we were eating popcorn a lot, is because it was cheap and it was filling. It wasn't the healthiest stuff, but again, as I said, I never went to bed hungry. So eating popcorn and a milkshake before bed, I was fine with it. I never went to bed hungry unless it was my own choice. And I want to tell you these things because these things are important. It's not about how many video games you have. It's not about how many toys you have. It's not about how many presents you get for Christmas or your birthday or whatever. I feel that you, Liam, are very blessed uh, with everything, but you got to understand that there's a time when people struggle, and you're not that far removed from the struggle. So I want you to understand that it's like, well, not poor. It wasn't always optimal growing up. But again, you could have never told me that we weren't rich because we constantly seemed to have everything we needed. Not everything we wanted, but we definitely had everything we needed. Um, continue growing up. Um, my mom and dad, right, my teenage years, especially, mom and dad were going through a lot of stuff. There was some fighting going on between the two of them. Not like fighting, but there was definitely some arguments going on between the two of them, and you could definitely tell that dad was doing things that was hurting grandmother emotionally at the very least. I have no idea the true story behind it. No one's ever told me, although there were suspicions that There were suspicions that there was extramarital affairs going on between my dad and somebody else. Cannot confirm nor deny that happened. I'm not saying this to badmouth Grandpa or say anything disparaging about Grandpa because I don't know it, but I do know where my thoughts were at the time. I also know that during this time frame, your grandfather and I became bitter fucking enemies. And when I say bitter fucking enemies, I mean you're almost at that age where your grandpa and I started getting into the fights, which means you and I are probably going to start getting into these fights as well. And it's not because I want to fight with you. It's because I want what's best for you. And you may not see it that way, but that's the way it is. I know this now looking back at it. I didn't at the time. Grandpa was never one of the best communicators in the world with me. So finding out that him saying I love you, some of the first memories I have of it happened in my teenage years. Um, but yeah, your grandpa and I got into a couple of fights in when I was about 12 or so. It was after Grandpa passed away. Your great grandfather passed away. He passed away on November 15th, 1989. And it was. My grandfather was my hero. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I was named after him, much like you're named after your grandfather. Your great grandfather had cancer. He had lung cancer. He smoked, and he got cancer and it metastasized and it spread throughout his body. It was probably Christmas 1986, 87, somewhere in that area. My mother told me that, you need to enjoy your time with Grandpa because he's probably not going to be here next year. And that's a horrible thing to say to a child without it really explaining anything to it. So I have a memory of this Christmas. I got Optimus Prime, the 1986 Gen 1 Optimus Prime with the semi trailer and the Transformer toy, and it was the best fucking toy I've ever gotten. I have memories of this toy when I got it, opened it up, and it was just fantastic. Again, not a rich family, but that was not a cheap toy either. And again, you would have never been able to tell me we weren't rich. Um, but yeah, your great grandfather had cancer, and there's some things that I remember clearly about it, and it triggers memories today, considering how Grandpa's doing with the strokes he's been having. Your great grandfather and I used to watch baseball together. I used to love watching the Pittsburgh Pirates with him. That was what we would do in the summertime. We would watch baseball together. And then Tony Pena, the catcher for the Pittsburgh Pirates, he went to the St. Louis Cardinals, and I loved Tony Pena. I loved the catcher of the Pittsburgh Steelers. I thought he was one of the best catchers I'd ever seen, and I will still argue this point to a lot of people today. But when he went to the St. Louis Cardinals, there was a shortstop there named Ozzie Smith, and Ozzie Smith was fantastic. Probably the greatest shortstop who ever played the game. Right when he took the field for the first time, he would go out, and as his way out to shortstop, he would do a backflip on the way back there. And Ozzie Smith had a very pronounced flattened nose. Like, his nose was flat. And my granddad said it's because he screwed up the flip one time and landed straight on his face. Neither here nor there. But anyway, there was a little bit of a divide between us. I mean, I was still a Pirates fan, but the Cardinals were now my team. So, but yeah, but when he started to get cancer, he eventually got moved into a nursing home, and there was multiple times we had to go down to the hospital to see him, and it was this fall of 1989, and he was in a nursing home, and his mind was pretty well gone at that point, and I had just sprained my ankle. I rolled my ankle going down the bleachers at a football game, and I rolled it bad. Like, I rolled it really bad. I thought I broke it. And I was on crutches for a few days, like a week and a half. And we went to the nursing home. And my grandfather didn't really recognize anyone, but he knew who I was. And he was very concerned that I was on crutches. And there's times your grandfather had a second stroke not too long ago. And while he was going through it, he couldn't really know. He didn't always know it was me on the phone, but my God, as soon as he realized it, he asked how Liam was doing. So there's you know, grandson and grandchild, I guess. But anyway, your grandfather and I, during some of our heated conversations, we got into a lot of disagreements. In eighth grade, I'm not going to go too much in depth with it because you don't need to think about it too much. But I had discovered self pleasure, let's put it that way. And I was spending an awful lot of time in the bathroom. Because I was spending so much time in the bathroom, my parents thought I was on drugs. I took this as a fucking insult to me because holy shit, I would never do drugs. Eighth grade me would never do drugs. We will talk about ninth and 10th grade me later. Uh, Actually, it was 10th grade me, and 11th grade me, and 12th grade me. We'll talk about that versions of me later. But 8th grade me, absolutely not. Would I never do drugs? Biggest insult in life. I was pissed. Me and Dad got into this end all be all fight, like just screaming at each other. And it got to the point where we just kind of stayed the fuck out of each other's way for the next decade. Like, your grandpa would be there. I mean, he was at my graduations. He went to every one of my concerts. He helped guide me through some of my career choices in life. He always gave me advice when I wanted it or if I didn't want it, even. But a lot of times I just tried to steer clear of him because me and him didn't have anything to say to each other. He disliked some of my girlfriends. He disliked this. He disliked that. I liked it. I was going to do this. I was going to go become a professional wrestler. He thought that was the dumbest thing he'd ever heard of. 48-year-old me agrees with Grandpa. That was the dumbest fucking thing I could have ever done. After the 1997 tryout, look, professional wrestlers are some of the most gifted and strongest and talented athletes on this planet, and there's nothing you can tell me otherwise. And I am not one of them. But yeah, your granddad and I got into a lot of fights, and it was when I found out I was going to become a father, is when me and him patched things up. Um, I started listening to him a lot more because I don't know how to be a dad, and he did. And then I realize now, as an adult, as I'm growing up, and at some point you will have kids, and you'll look at me and it's like, how do I be a dad? I don't fucking know. Just kind of winging it, buddy. Sorry. I hate to break it to you. There's no great plan. Just winging it. But yeah, your dad and I, or your grandpa and I got into a lot of fights. Your grandma and I were always close. Your grandmother was more she was the scarier of my parents, believe it or not. Of the two parents, I would have rather pissed off my dad than pissed off my mom. Um, Grandma had a lot of things going on in her life, as I said. Um, Through her marriage and stuff, I sided with her during the fights with Grandpa. She was always there for me. Would she knows things that Dad doesn't know. Let's put it that way. And one of the things was is I almost was a father almost 20 years, 18 years before you were born. And it was the most terrifying experience of my life as an 18-year-old. And things happened, and the baby was never born. And it's still something that weighs on my mind a lot, both good and bad. I don't think I'd be where I'm at today if that baby had been born. And while I don't hate my life, there's always a part of me in the back of my mind of what if. I'm going all over the place tonight, aren't I? Let's see here. But Grandma knew about that. Grandpa, to the best of my knowledge, did. Grandma also was super scary because there was this one guy that your Aunt Shannon was dating. And Aunt Shannon and him, well, he was a cancer. He was an absolute cancer. And my mom offered several of my friends $100 each, so it was like $500 total to go put this dude in the hospital. And by long story short, I'm just gonna let it go. I'm not even gonna say any more about it. I know statute of limitations and all that, but I'm just gonna let it go. Let's see here. What else? Uh, your uncle Jerry, my brother, he was cool. We were always cool together. I'm glad I got to see him one last time last year before he passed away last year. It was kind of a shock. Your Aunt Kathy, me and her don't always get see eye to eye on things, but she's always been kind of the voice of reason in the family. Jody, your Aunt Jody, who you only met one time before she passed away. She was probably my favorite of my siblings. And she was 5 foot nothing, probably 120 pounds at her heaviest. And she would fuck up anybody that got in her way. She took no shit, gave no quarter, lived her life the way she lived her life. And if there was one person I would love you to meet, other than your great grandfather, it would be my sister Jody. Um, Jody unfortunately passed away of cancer 11 years ago. Um, but her son and daughter, Dan and Ash, um, they're still close to me in my heart. And Ash talks to me fairly frequently. So, but yeah, if there's one person I'd like you to meet, it would be Jody. Jody took me to wrestling events for the first time. Jody took me to WrestleMania 3. Jody took me to see Hulk Hogan wrestle in the Civic Arena. Um, yeah. Then there's your Aunt Chris, who is the mother hen of the group. I wouldn't say she's a control freak, but I'd say she's kind of a control freak. Um, she'll herd and move things along at events. She'll take charge of an event. There's me, the laid back, troubled artist, but not as troubled as my brother Doug, who has lived a life, not necessarily a good one. He's been in and out of jail. He's made a lot of bad choices in life, uh, with drugs, with partners. I'm not going to go into a whole lot about it. There's no sense in degrading your uncle's name. Just know that I haven't seen my brother since 1988, and I'm okay with that. And then there's me, the troubled artist who is constantly in his head thinking about things, movies, what am I going to do, my progress as I work through this job where I work on cars, which is wild because, I used to be a manager for Walmart and now I'm working on cars. It's wild. What a wild life I've lived. And I don't regret any of the decisions I've made because every decision I make leads me up to this point right here. And that is, as your father, Liam, is the greatest honor I've ever had. And I wouldn't change a bit of it because without it, I wouldn't be here with you. Then there's your crazy Aunt Shannon, who's a year younger than me. Um, Much like Doug, Shannon makes a lot of bad decisions, but she tries. She tried harder than Doug did. So yeah, that's my rambling story of the family right now. So eventually, I'll probably do another one of these. Eventually, I'll be willing and ready to talk about your mother and my relationship, but right now, not so much. Hey, thanks for watching. I'll see you soon, buddy. Later, taters.